We have on Hooded Night Wednesday the announcement from Blizzard on the official release date of Midnight, which, as they claim, is going to be the 2nd of March 2026. Now, there are a couple of interesting things with this release date. For starters, if you remember back in the days when before Blizzard released The War Within, one of their announcements related to the expansion was their commitment to now release shorter, faster paced expansions. They were claiming that they wanted to go back down to around an 18 months long cycle for their expansions. This was after we have gone through either super long 10, 12, even 14-month long last tiers, things like Siege of Orgrimmar in Mists, or things like Hellfire Citadel in Worlds of Draenor, to then trying something else, adding the Fated season, essentially a recycled season, to not make the last season of the expansion be a year long. Instead, add something else. So in Shadowlands and in Dragonflight, we had this added recycled season at the end, which was still pretty boring, but definitely better than having the same tier last almost a year. So with the announcement, there was some skepticism that Blizzard might have been able to shrink the expansions to be much faster, while players still pointing out, hold on a second, does this mean now we are still paying full price for a game, even if the game now is going to be 6 months shorter of content? That seems a bit unfair, and it kind of is. However, with this announcement of the new expansion coming out on the 2nd of March, this puts our release dates, if you consider that The War Within came out on the 26th of August of 2024, so we do the timeline from the 26th of August 2024 to the 2nd of March 2026, and the total comes out at 18 months and 4 days. So precisely on the mark, precisely on the exact promise of making it 18 months long. So that was respected. To be fair, we were also skeptical on the promise of starting to push out faster cycles of patches when they claimed they wanted to go and come out with a new patch every 2 months. This was already back in Dragonflight, which they kind of started to follow as a trend. We see now that we have all of the dates of The War Within that this was correct. If you look at the timelines from the release to 11.0.5 and 0.7 into Season 2, and then 11.1.5, 11.1.7 into Season 3 of 11.2, and then 0.5, and the recently announced 11.2.7, which is the last patch of this expansion, which is the 2nd of December. It's again roughly 2 months after 11.1.5, which was roughly 2 months after the release of the season. And now the only one that will stay out of this trend is the release of 12.0 of the next expansion, which is 90 days, 3 months after 11.2.7. However, we can kind of split this almost in half, because there's going to be the pre-patch, right? The pre-patch event, which should roughly be about a month before the release of Midnight. So that is also what is going to cut this time from December of 11.2.7 to the release of the next expansion. Now, as for this timeline, we have another thing worth pointing out, that now that we also know the time that we have left before the release of the next expansion, we can also tell essentially how much Blizzard has left to work on the expansion. With this timing, now we know we are going to have in total 112 days worth of beta, which is an okay, in fact, even borderline average number of beta days compared to past expansions. It's just barely above Legion and BFA worth of beta timings, a bit above Dragonflight and below Shadowlands. So it's nothing special in terms of duration of beta for an expansion. What we do have though in this expansion is the much bigger hurdle, the much bigger problem of the preparation of the disarmament of add-ons and the changing and upgrading of your base game UI, which many players have pointed out sadly is sort of muffling and overshadowing the content of the actual expansion, right? If you look at all of the news you have seen being covered about this expansion day in, day out, even the statements of the devs every other day, every week, most of the things you have heard up to now is basically just stuff around add-ons, stuff around the additions to the UI, right? How about things like the new spec of Demon Hunter, Devourer? How about the new parade mechanic, the new open world, I guess, tougher content? How about the Arcantina, the new RP storytelling hub that will be in Midnight? Nobody knows, nobody cares, because everyone is fixated on the UI changes, right? Well, now that we know the release date of the expansion, we also know there is roughly, give or take, about 50 business days left before the release of the expansion. We know Blizzard is off on weekends, and we also know Blizzard takes a couple of weeks of break for holidays in Christmas and New Year's. So we take these off, there's about 50 days left to work on the expansion. That's what we have. Now that we also have the date, the release date of the expansion itself. So we have this essentially fixed now. We could have predicted this if we stood by the promise, I guess, of releasing the expansions every 18 months, that this was going to be the date. Now that we have it officially, we now have a timeline to essentially expect things to be worked on and to be done with before this time. Hopefully everything will work out just fine. We won't release the expansion with massive problems and massive complaints from the player base, kind of like what happened back in Shadowlands when the player base was a bit not sold on the concept of covenants, especially the way they were released, you being locked, you having to choose one and being locked into one forever, which they then took like a year before walking back on. Hopefully, even if we get in a situation where things are awful and we haven't been able to sort them out properly before the release of the actual expansion, it won't take a year before solving all of those issues. After all, Blizzard themselves, for example, when it came to add-ons, pointed out it's too fast. We won't have time to fix everything. We won't have time to resolve all of the issues. So we're only limiting ourselves to trying to fix the bigger ones, trying to solve the most glaring problems, and we have to leave the rest for later. So hopefully we won't have too many things left to fix by the release of the actual expansion, but still, it's good now to have the official 100% guaranteed, confirmed timeline for the release of Midnight, which, yeah, in the end is not really a surprise. It has been following the timeline we were expecting anyways, but now we have the official stamp on it. So for today, on this Wednesday and on this weekly reset, this was all there was for today, the announcement of the next expansion. Now, with this out of the way, we can now leave each other. We can start our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, for once, for such a short announcement, we were able to keep the video short enough. That's good.